You know that.
This is my ex-friend and colleague, Xiaodong Lin, who's here at Teachers College, who was instrumental in helping to co-organize this conference. And remarkably, I wrote a book called Failure, Why Science is So Successful. And shortly after that, an article came out and caught a lot of press about how important failure is in education. I thought, well, this is really interesting. Who's this by? And it's by this professor at Teachers College, whose office I can see outside of my office, but who I never knew somehow or another. But we've since met, and we've had quite a good time together and continue to. And she's going to talk about failure in education. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. So it has been an incredible conference because I've been feeling very lonely for several years studying failure. Finally, all the colleagues filled up this room. So I feel very fortunate. And so I've been thinking about throughout our lives, from the beginning of our lives, when we start to try to learn walk, we fail. And then we try to learn how to eat. It's a struggle. And then we got an F. We don't want to tell our parents. And we don't know what to do. And then here it's getting worse, college rejected. And then you're rejected by your girlfriend. And then the next one is your paper got rejected. And then you're fired. So I am giving you a very sad picture about life. But really, this is life. I have experienced all of that. But I've been searching for courses and thinking about what can I do? Every day I'm asking, what can I do? But there's no course from K to 12 to college on what shall I do? So that's where I think probably the education about failure, especially how to conceptualize failure, how to prepare for that, might be one of the most important power for education. But that has not been utilized. So that's where I'm so passionate about this. And so in my today's talk, I'm going to talk about two issues. One is why do we need this failure education? And the second of all, can we do it? And so I want to show you in a case how we have done that, but I'm sure there are many, many ways that we can do it. Is microphone working okay here? Okay. So, everybody has seen this picture, right? The leaking pipe of the STEM field. So at the beginning, we have lots of people interested in STEM, especially in science. When I talk to the science professors and whatever, they have lots of people at Introduction to Biology 101. But by the fourth year, the biology class become 5 people, 6 people, 7 people. By the time they graduate, we have even fewer. So we lost about 80% of students. So that's a severe problem for the United States and also for China now, because the life is getting better. No one wants to suffer. So they all want to have an easy life. As a result, STEM field is getting less and less attractive. But when I went to college in China, if you go to STEM field, you're viewed as a genius. And today, if you go to STEM field, maybe you're viewed as an idiot. Because who wants to suffer? And so I went to a high school we work with a lot of high school locally. So I just walk on the hallway, pick up some kids, and say, hey, if you think about scientists, what are the 3 words come to your mind? Here's what this person said. Smart, famous. See, if I could, the sound is not here. Let me see if I can put a microphone there, okay. Can you do it? Okay. How can I? The sound will be important for my talk, so. My sound is here. Is that good? Okay.
Smart, famous, research.
That's what he said. Smart.
Research, lab coats, genius.
I said, just tell me 3 words when you think about scientists.
Brilliant, cold, logical.
So, do you think this field is attractive? I don't think I want to enter that field if I know that's the kind of people I'll be colleagues with. But then when I really talk to the scientists, they're not at all like that. They're all very excited, like a Stuart, They're exciting to talk to. I asked my grad student last year, I had a Stuart, the only real scientist to my psychology seminar. I said, who's the best speaker? Who's most exciting? Everybody raised their hand, Stuart! But that does not appear in the high school. And so then we went through this vicious cycle. The students think about, if you're a genius, you really don't need to work hard. If you have to fail, you're absolutely not genius. Even you have to work hard, you're absolutely idiot. So this becomes a very bad cycle. So if I have to work hard, if I fail, I'm not fit into this field. So you hear a lot of a conversation like that. And you know that Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, that teaching students about your brain growth so you can always work hard. And so it has been popularized all the DOE, the Department of Education in New York City. So I went there, I interviewed kids several months ago. I said, so what kind of people can be a scientist? They said, everybody. As long as you work hard, you can be. And I was thinking, wow, Carol would love to hear that, and I love to hear that too. So I said, let me poke a little bit further. I said, do you think you can be a scientist? And several kids said, no, not me, it's other people. I said, you just said everyone can be, but why not you? And they said, right now my grade is F, so I can't do it. So that kind of thinking, conceptualization about failure, about not doing well, is deeply rooted in their thinking about what they can do, what they cannot do. So that's why I think this failure education is so important and so timely. So, and then where does this problem coming from? I've been looking at, just Google the internet. You look at these genius and the scientist genius, and as soon as you touch the word genius, you don't have to work hard and you don't have to fail. So I went to a textbook. Just flip over textbook in the high school during my experiment. It is said that Einstein is unlike anybody else, so it's untouchable. So these people are really untouchable people. So I try to do a study to see how I can move these people, God figure, into the level that students can even look at them, okay? And so how would I do that? We were exposing students to Einstein's struggle stories, or Marie Curie, or other people, and Thomas Edison and stuff like that. And so I have been looking for stories. I talked to Scholastic, and they said there are truly not many children books on how scientists fail, or anybody fail per se. There's just a few books on some people, not necessarily scientists. So they said that might be a great market. I said, okay. So I did research on that, so we developed our own stories. And so I think about exposing students to the story, and it's nothing special. This is 1,000 years of a trick, telling stories. But I think that a lot of students found that fascinating in the high school to listen to stories, because they said kindergarten you listen to stories, but after 5th grade you usually don't listen to stories, especially in science class. Okay, you're all about science and the hard concepts and the boring and the web code and all that stuff. So we want to bring in the humanity and the emotions into the science classroom. And so we did that, and why struggle stories? So I also think that the struggle really, I have some personal experiences about how when I tell struggle stories that connect people, because I came from China directly to Louisiana and to New Orleans. So when I landed in New Orleans, I was freaked out. I knew nobody. And I was thinking, how am I going to survive here? And it's a yaw, it's all Southern accent as well. And then I went to the school. A teacher grabbed me saying, I have a math problem I couldn't solve, and you Asians are great. So took me into the math classroom, I couldn't do a thing. So that also is very embarrassing. So anyway, in that situation, you really struggle. When you come across culture, you struggle more than ever. So I was thinking about, struggle story really connect me with people. So I started to think I need to test it out scientifically, otherwise I can never publish in the Nature. I still couldn't do it. So we did this and we measure, so we randomly assigned the students into several conditions. One is that they're reading Einstein's struggle stories, like how he was rejected, and how his work was not at all accepted immediately, and how people attack him. And Marie Curie has to test thousands of pounds of miracle minerals in order to finally find the elements that's radioactive and stuff like that. So that's one group, and the other group randomly assigned 400 students into another group is reading about Einstein stories. I mean, the successful stories, how great he is, what a great discovery he has done, and why is that important to the human beings and all that. And so lately, we're also testing these conditions versus brain growth. That is Carol Dweck's condition, which is show you the brain, how your brain is built, and then the more difficult, challenging stuff, you challenge your brain, you become smarter. So we're testing these different conditions and versus scientific methods. So I will talk about that quickly too. So these are our measures. We measure some behavioral measures to see, first of all, grades. This is what teachers care the most. So if you destroy the grades and if kids did worse after you go to their classroom, they said, don't come here. So anyway, I saw 5 minutes sign. So I'm not going to show you these graphs, but just trust me, we have a data, we published it. And I have my article over there. Anybody interested, I'll give you an article. So I'm not going to go there. So anyway, we found that in the 6 weeks of our experiments, students, the grades in a marking period during the 6 weeks of our experiments for the struggles condition did significantly better than the other group. As a matter of fact, that the control groups even did worse than they first came in after they read a successful story. And then we also found it did not just come through like that easily. You have to be personally feeling connected to the scientists in order to get higher grades. So if you just feel this is just somebody yo-yo and doing that, I have no personal connection, that doesn't work either. So we did a mediation analysis. We find that feeling connected to scientists as a person really matters. So now I'm skipping all these data. Okay, it's not because I don't value data, but no time. And so lately, we also compare, I said 3 conditions. We found something, brain condition and a control and all that. We also found something interesting. We gave students some this story exercise saying, what did you remember about the video? You can just glance over. I also have the video. I don't have time to show you. And then I asked them, so what challenges do you think you have? From my naked eye, we're still going to analyze. I found that people who are in a struggle story seems to be able to identify specific challenges in science class rather than just saying, I'll work harder. They have more specific areas they seem to identify to work with comparing to the brain area. And the brain knowledge group seems also very interesting. They're looking at other things not related to science class. They say, I will manage my time better. And the control group is very general, saying things, I will memorize the table and stuff like that, and chemistry tables, things like that. But I'm still testing on that, coding, all this stuff. So, where am I? Okay, so these are the different conditions that I don't have to. So what surprised us is that I think that these old and dead people and the students can still connect to. So we can still get them alive, and the AI has a great potential to help us to make a dead scientist alive. And then also we find that the sharing struggle really connect people, and as I hypothesized earlier. And so what can educators really take away? I think that teachers could start telling their stories, but that's tricky because teachers are supposed to be a God figure that how could you have failure? But once you start to build a rapport with the students, sharing failure might be very interesting because I do share my failure in my lab. And another thing is that I think that we really need to bring the humanity into the science rather than treating science and math like no human is ever involved in there. If you ask them who created knowledge, they may think it's from alien. And so we have a lot of, my whole lab, a lot of people, my students are doing different studies here. I won't go through them. And then this is my lab. Has people doing all these stuff, and I'm looking for yet another postdoc. And so if any of you guys have any leads, then let me know. And so what's next? So I really want to study more instructional science of failure education and creating instructional activities and to really test out in greedy detail that what really can happen, in what time it can benefit students. And so this is what I think. We really need a theory about how students conceptualize failure. We have incredible, probably over 50 years of research on students' theories about competence intelligence. We have almost zero about how they think about failure. That's the other side of yin and yang. So if we only study the yin, didn't study the yang, I don't think we understand the whole thing completely. So we need a great theory and a take home, no pain, no gain. If you haven't paid and you just know you haven't done anything. So thank God to the NSF. Thank you so much.
So our next speaker is Liz Santana from the Right Question Institute. She's co-director of the Right Question Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, along with Dan Rothstein. And they have together come up with a rather remarkable and surprisingly simple, I don't mean simple-minded, but simple approach to education, especially in young children, but it goes all the way through adults. I also recommend that. I don't have time to go through her whole biography here, but it's quite motivating. So,
good afternoon to all. Thank you, Stuart. It is really exciting to be here and to have an opportunity to share with you some of our work and some of the failures that we have gone through. So as I was thinking about this presentation, I struggled quite a bit about how to approach it. And then in having conversations with my co-director, Dan Rothstein, he said, well, Luz, the conference is about failure. So there is no way that you could fail. So I'm testing that out. And, whoops, something is not working. It's the presenter view, right? I'm failing already with the PowerPoint.
It's not going there.
It's presenter view.
I think it should be. Let's here we are.
There we go. So as I thought about the presentation, I thought about our work, and we have been for many years doing what is called non-formal education. And I decided to present some of our work in the classroom, but I would also like to take you outside the classroom to look at education and then how can it help people participate, advocate, navigate, and deal with failure. So I'm going to present around the welfare office, the schools, and then another secret place where failure happens quite a bit that is affecting us all. So first, in the welfare office, this is a place where people are very often reminded of their failure of not being self-sufficient. I know this well because this was the place where I was years ago, but it was a place which also became an opportunity to get better, to be able to help myself and participate in many decisions affecting myself and my community. And I had that opportunity only because my social worker was thinking outside of the box about his work and about how to take the encounter at the welfare office as an opportunity to build skills and to help people help themselves. And at the beginning, I thought that he was sort of, crazy because I was expecting services, and he said, no. The first thing that we have to do is to help you learn how you can navigate the system to get the services that you need. Now, that was years ago, and he did a good job. And sometimes I say, I don't know if it was because of what he did in teaching me to do little things, or if it was because I got too tired from his insistence that I could help myself. I was a migrant, and I could not thread together 2 sentences in English. Not that I can really do it today, but those days it was even worse. So what I have learned over time is that what happened to me years ago is still happening to many people. And people out there right now have around 100 million encounters with programs, services, and institutions. And these are places where very often they are reminded that they are failing, sometimes that they don't deserve the services that they are applying for. And right now, in 2012, there were approximately 5,200 million people who were in some sort of government assistance programs, at the welfare office, at the schools, food stamps. And I know that that's still going on. I know it because of my neighbors, friends, and people in my community. But those encounters could be opportunities for education. And in education, just the workers need to start thinking about a different way to provide these services. Now, from being a welfare recipient, I sort of got lucky, and I'm not going to go through the whole story. But back in 1990, I began to work with Dan Rothstein, my co-director. And we were working in the town where I still live, Lawrence, Massachusetts, and in a dropout prevention program. And it was there where we learned from the families that they were not going to the schools because they didn't even know what questions to ask. When we heard that they didn't know what questions to ask, guess what we did? We came up with a list of questions that we thought that they should be asking. And they showed us that we were wrong, because it was not about giving the questions. It was about developing the skill so they could they could ask questions in any situation that they were in. We failed initially in teaching them how to ask the question. In fact, we were not doing that. And we built dependency. And every time that they needed questions, they used to come back and say, what should I ask? When we began to teach them how to ask questions and advocate for themselves, there was some sort of transformation in people. So for example, this quote is from a participant in an adult education program who said that the teacher taught her how to ask questions, and she learned how to go to places with it. Before, I had doormat written across my forehead. And here I have a quote from a workshop participant in a homeless shelter in Kentucky who said, whatever it takes to get the information I need. So teaching people how to ask questions allows them to become information seekers rather than being dependent on information given to them. So in the schools, well, here is what college presidents say what students should learn in college. In 2002, the New York Times conducted an interview of college presidents. And Leon Boston, the president of Bard College, said that the primary skills should be analytical skills of interpretation and inquiry. In other words, know how to frame a question. And then Nancy Cantor, the former chancellor of the University of Illinois, said that the best we can do for students is to have them ask the right questions. So there was a 1912 study from Romiet Stevens, who said that the question as a measure of efficiency in instruction, a critical study of classroom practice, Columbia University. An unusual lesson because 25 of the 34 students were asked by the questions were asked by the pupils. The result was that the lesson developed an impetus born of real interest. I mention it because this lesson was unique in a series of 100. And then there is this guy, another guy from Columbia University, last name Firestein, who says that we must teach students how to think in questions, how to manage ignorance. We have been using this quote quite a bit with educators, and it really resonates with them. All right, so that was what college presidents said. You know, Firestein mentioned the value of question formulation, yet only 27% of students believe college taught them how to ask questions. And this is from a study from the University of Washington in 2016. But the problem begins long before college. So here I have a chart with basic skill attainment, reading and writing. And as you can see, it starts at 0, and as year go by, those two skills begin to improve until they level off. But here is what happens with the skill of question formulation. At age 2, kids ask many, many questions to the point of driving parents crazy. But then that skill declines drastically. When students learn to ask questions, this is what they have to say. The way it made me feel was smart because I was asking good questions and giving good answers. Now, I'm using this quote because this is a 9th grader in a remedial summer program who was about to fail. So asking questions really helped him feel better about himself, and feeling smart probably was not a word that he was previously thinking and using. All right. So let me go 1 second back. So what we have done is to develop a very specific process in which there is a focus or topic for asking questions. And then we have developed some rules that provide some safety in asking questions. The rules are: ask as many questions as you can, do not stop to try to judge or answer the questions, write down the question exactly as it is stated, and turn any statements into questions. So participants, regardless of whether they are in a social services agency or at the school, they produce questions following the rules. They identify different kinds of questions. They prioritize the questions, provide a rationale for prioritizing the questions, and then they establish an action plan, and the final step is to reflect on the process that they went through and also on the topic that they were asking questions about. And that has proven to be a very efficient way of teaching people how to ask questions. It works in the community, and it works from kindergarten to higher education. So what we have said is that the question formulation technique process is a rigorous protocol that produces consistent results. There is a real science behind the process. When we began to do this work in the classroom, it was in 2010. We were working across fields, and then we were broke. About 1 week to put the padlock in the door in our office. And then Harvard Education Press invited us to put our ideas in a publication. And my co-director looks at me and says, there is nothing that we are going to learn, but maybe this is a way of getting funding, so let's do it. And these days, he says, I was really, really wrong, because we have learned quite a bit from doing it. Right now, there are 250,000 teachers around the world who are using our process to help students produce their own questions. Now, here is another place that maybe I don't have to go in, where, as you know, we have sort of failed. And in this place, probably failure is not a good thing. All right, and one of the challenges is that traditional forms of democratic participation have failed as well. So the efforts in lobbying, in community organizing, in public hearings, in demonstrations, all those, they have an effect, but they don't really get the majority of people to participate and vote. When the presidential elections, there is a bump in participation, but that is not sustained. Now, let's look at this. Remember that I told you when I began about all the encounters that people have with programs and services. There are 164 million of those. And those could be opportunities to educate people to participate. Because if we teach them how to participate, and I have two very specific skills for that. One is the skill of asking questions, and the other one is the skill of being able to identify decisions and asking questions about decisions. Then I think that they will be able to make a difference. And in this picture, I have two women. The women in the right, few people know about her. And the woman in the left, very few people know about her. The woman in the right, many people know about her work. The woman in the left is Septima Clark, and the one in the right is Rosa Parks. And it happened that Septima in the 70s, she was fired from her job as a teacher in the South Carolina public schools. And she funded citizen schools and decided to teach people with low literacy how to inquire. So I would like to leave you with this thing. If you want to make changes, if you want to help people deal with the issue of failure, there is no skill better than the skill of question formulation.
Our first respondent is Sarah Jane Bales. Sarah is an associate professor at the University of Sussex in theater performance studies, and she comes to us here from Melbourne, believe it or not. She schlepped all the way up here from Melbourne, up, I guess, is a relative term, but you know what I mean, where she just completed a tenure as a McGeorge Fellow at the University of Melbourne. I asked her to come here because she's the author of a wonderful book called Performance Theater and the Poetics of Failure. Sarah.
Okay, thanks, Stuart, and thanks, everybody. Those were two fantastic, really dynamic papers. And I'm just going to say at the beginning of all this, my brain is not quite connecting properly because I'm still on a 16-hour time lag difference. So that's my excuse for everything I'm going to say. But one of the things that really struck me between those two presentations was Xiaodong's. At the beginning, there was the slide of the students, I think, the questionnaire with the students who responded to things about being a scientist that said things like smart, famous, brilliant, cold, and logical. And then I was struck minutes later to be faced with that slide of the welfare office. And so I just started to think about that enormous gap that we always face between, and about where we are sitting in Columbia in this kind of seat of incredible privilege, and how much we're failing all the time in education to bring in the people who really need to be educated. That's an enormous thing, and I'm just observing that, the difference between those two things. I'm really struck by Luce's focus on the question and the skill of asking questions, but that also makes me feel really sad and lament the fact that it becomes increasingly difficult, I think, in education as educators to allow students the space to sit in a space of speculation. And I've really noticed that in the UK in the last 10 years as fees have come in, and I know fees were always here in the States, but and I was here, actually, I was a graduate student here at NYU, so I kind of became I became used to the culture of education that you had to pay for and pay for the rest of your life. But in England, sort of watching that wave come in and watching how that's really changed the students' ability to think that they can sit in a space of speculation, 1 minute left, for 3 years and have the luxury of failing and the luxury of taking risks in their thinking at all. I find it a really difficult thing. So it's kind of brilliant to hear you putting the skill of asking questions at the beginning of what your project is, Luce. A couple of other things, role models of persistence. I was thinking about, and that was in Xiaodong's presentation, trying to expose students to models of persistence. I think that's really critical too, because everybody wants a really fast answer to everything. Students come to me all the time and say, just tell me how to get a first. I just want to know how to get a first on this paper. And the struggle that you both talked about, actually, and sitting in the struggle is an almost impossible thing to do. I don't know what the answers are to that at all, but those things really strike me. And I think about trying to teach them stick-at-itness and trying to also teach them to think about sticking with the aim rather than the goal and sticking with the process rather than the product. And now my time is up. So, thanks.
And second and final respondent is Alondra Nelson, who you all know already, I guess, if you were here this morning. If you came later, she's in the Department of Sociology.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was delighted to be asked to say a few words about these wonderful papers that allow us to think about failure as a social and dynamic process. On the one hand, teaching failure and the Santana project and work, and on the other hand, helping us to think about how students conceptualize failure in Professor Zhen's paper. A few thoughts about Professor Zhen's research project. More just questions, because I think it's a laudable endeavor. I did wonder about the two questions, I guess. One about priming difficulty in students. So what are the downsides of asking them explicitly about difficulty as opposed to asking them in a more open-ended way about how they think about the challenges. I mean, difficulty is a word that suggests from the beginning before the question is posed that science is difficult, which may not leave open the possibility of having other experiences. So I wondered about the priming piece of using that particular phrase in the questions for the work. I also was curious about, I guess I feel two ways about the use of great scientists as the exemplar, because I think one of the things we also want to teach students with regards to science is that it's regular, that it's everyday, and that it's banal. And for students who are facing challenges with science or difficulties, to use your phrase, Einstein is inspiring, but Einstein might also be deeply paralyzing because, Einstein comes along once in a generation. So I wondered about not only teaching about the greats, but teaching about, in fact, the banality of science, the sort of day-to-day lab work that's repetitive, that regular folks do, and then go home and make lunches for their kids or make dinner for their families or whatever as another way of kind of balancing that idea in the project. With Ms. Santana's paper, what's fascinating work, and was so inspired and loved the invocation of Septima Clark and the Highlander School and lay education, peer education, at the end of her presentation. I was struck also by, I wanted to hear you say more about the use of failure and to really unpack whether or not we should accept as failure the fact that people find themselves at the welfare office, right? So whose failure is that? How do we think about, while I appreciate and understand the important work that you do to respond to that, how do we help people to understand that failure is nestled within a kind of, context of social advantage and disadvantage that both has that individuals have something to do with and have shaped, and also some ways have not shaped. I very much appreciated in your paper that the opposite of failure is not success, or not only success, but was also empowerment, was agency, was inquisitiveness, this idea of questioning as a response to failure, and appreciated very much as well, and would love you to hear you say more about failure as questioning and as a way of about thinking about success is not the only sort of way of thinking about a response to failure, and that there's myriad responses. And what I thought very interesting about your work, responses that fall to the individual, right, but also fall to the individual in community, which was present in some of the images that you showed as well. So I will leave that as my response, and I welcome the conversation. Thank you.
Both our respondents, would the speakers like to have a moment to respond?
So I thank you so much for your very insightful comments. So one thing about the using scientists versus everyday people, we actually did a test that, and we actually bring in another child, another college child, closer to our high school age, and to bring their struggle stories. We did not replicate a study.
I mean, everyday scientists.
Right, everyday scientist, we also have that, Johnson. We mocked up the Einstein story, but put a different name on that. And interestingly, depend on how you were perceived at the beginning. And another thing is that the reason we did a scientist to cure one problem only at the time is that these people are genius. They should not have any struggles. So if they're genius, they should not make a mistake. So I try to tell them they do. They're just like us. So that's the goal. But I think we did another test right now. We're writing up the paper on Johnson versus Einstein. And interestingly, the Einstein group did the worst. It's all struggle story. Einstein group did the worst, and Thomas Edison did the second worst, did better than Einstein, and Johnson did the best. But that's not with students. That's in MTurk with the randomized adults. So these are all interesting questions to study. It may not replicate that well as John was talking about in many human variables.
I just had a quick comment there. I agree with you that, of course, regularizing science would be a very good idea. The fight, of course, is that the textbooks don't do that. The textbooks tell heroic narratives of geniuses doing this, that, and the other thing, and I think that's the battle that Xiaodong is waging in this case.
I think studying textbook to see what's out there, it will be very interesting as well.
It would be great to change the textbooks. I agree, yes. I absolutely agree with you. Who said that? Where is she? Oh, there you go.
Historian of science, perhaps?
Luz, would you like to respond to either of our respondents' comments?
Yes. Well, I will start by looking at what happens at the welfare office and unpacking some of that failure. So very often the individuals are blamed for not having the resources, for not having education, for sort of failing in providing for their families. But if you look at it, there might be things that people didn't do, but it is more of a systemic or system problem in which people don't get the resources that they need. Sometimes they don't get opportunities to advance themselves. If they fail in school early, the chances that they will be able to sustain their families are sort of slim. So very often they become dependent on the system. The workers at the welfare office very often are in the same condition than the clients. And they are oppressed by the system, by the rules, how they provide the services, and so on. Now, both the clients and the workers are affected by decisions that are made higher up. They are made at the state level, they are made at the federal level. And the work of the worker is usually to communicate the bad news. You didn't qualify. But very often, they also do the work in a way that doesn't help people. And rather than trying to help, they are another, level of oppression. So I heard from women in New Hampshire, in the small town of Dover, who very often, when they went to the welfare office, they were in a program, in a transition program from welfare to work. And very often they heard from the workers, oh, you didn't bring the paperwork. And it was that they lost the paperwork. Or, you are lying because you are living with your boyfriend. But they used to do that in a way that that everybody could hear. So they were putting down the clients. So I will tell you quickly what the adult educator did. So they were in the adult education program, and the teacher gave the women a notebook where they could write their questions in preparation for their appointments at the welfare office. And they did. She also taught them to write down any decision that was being made at that encounter. And they did. And within 4 weeks, the dynamic of the welfare office began to change. The workers, rather than telling the women, you lost the paperwork, you are lying to me, they used to say, where is your notebook? Where do I have to sign? And we learned about that because there was a new participant in the program who came back and said, the most weird thing happened to me at the welfare office. I went because I had an appointment tomorrow, and the worker asked me, where is your notebook and where do I have to sign? So the others told them what they were doing. And what they were able to do was to change the dynamic of that encounter. Now, the workers in that place were not doing the education, which is something that we like to see happening. It was an outside source. It was the adult education program. But what I see is that in any encounter that people have, in any opportunity, people learn how to advocate for themselves, prepare with their questions, think about the potential decisions that will be made. We will be looking at a whole different dynamic, and that will be one way of beginning to change things. When people become aware that decisions are made in those encounters, they will be able to make connections on how those decisions affect them, but they will be able to make connections on the decisions being made at higher levels.
These afternoon sessions, as you know, are an hour rather than an hour and a half. If there are any questions, you should go to the microphone. Otherwise, I'll
And
start one. Yes, go on.
Could I have 1 minute to talk about the failure and failure on questions. I got it wrong, but I would like to say that what is happening in the classroom and education is that until now, I will say, teachers have not had an easy methodology for teaching students how to ask questions and how to feel safe, because the process that we have developed allows the students to feel safe. They will not fail if they ask the wrong questions, because their questions are the right questions, because that's what they want to know. So therefore, what we have done is to provide a method that is very easy, and teachers have embraced it without a mandate from the schools. Initially, they had a lot of fear in doing this work. They were afraid of not having or failing in answering students' questions. But then they figured out that it was okay, and they put it from the beginning. They let students know, okay, we're going to do some work with the questions, but we are going to do it together. And that way, it's safe for the students, but it's safe also for the teachers who are in a profession that is very demanding.
Let's try and get a couple of quick questions in before our break.
Yeah, my name is Max. I'm not a scientist, but the overarching
Remember that.
sense that I get from the both of what you're trying to do is essentially you're trying to inculcate curiosity. It's curious to me why the word never came up, and because curiosity is not taught, it's stimulated, right? So if you stimulate people to feel the right to be curious, then you're going to bring out of them whatever their curiosity is. It may be for science, or it may be for something else. Secondly, I thought there was an event that occurred on and I don't mean, I'm not highlighting anything, but I found it curious that when the technology went bad, your reaction was, oh, look at me, I'm failing now. When it wasn't you, it was the technology.
I was just joking about that.
Actually, that's not a joke. Do you know what I'm saying? Because what happens, and I know this because I taught public speaking, which is first of all, that's an oxymoron. You can't teach it. Secondly, the premise of the course, as I taught it, was that you have to fail. And it was impossible. It took me weeks upon weeks upon weeks to get students to embrace just the idea of failing, laughing at themselves, and then getting up and trying again. So, it's the personalization, I think, that has to be addressed in both arenas. And by the way, my question is, and I do have a question, where does the science guy fit in?
What science guy? Who's the science?
You don't know the science guy? Bill Nye?
Bill Nye, the science guy.
Yeah, I mean,
I think Sara wants to. Did you want to respond to that first part of it first?
no, I was
Let's
just-
do that and worry about Bill Nye later.
Okay,
Is
because
that all
I
right?
think he's very important in science.
Okay,
No, it was just a really quick thing, because I was just thinking about, that you were saying about getting them to fail in front of each other and feeling okay about that. I just think it's really difficult to feel vulnerable in a situation if you don't feel entitled. And that's the problem in the classroom half the time, I find, is that you're dealing with people who don't feel entitled and don't feel empowered yet, and asking a question indicates that you're stupid in some way rather than that you're curious. And I don't think there's enough done actually in the culture of education to prevent that feeling. So I think it's, and I also, one thing to add to that, I think it's hard to be curious when you haven't even got the basic things that you need yet. Right?
I absolutely disagree.
Oh.
Okay. We'll take that up in the next session. We have one more quick question if we could get it in.
Okay.
Well, we can, if you go quick, we can get two. Come on, come on.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm actually a mom, a homeschool teacher, and an SAT tutor. I was actually excited about your findings because I do find that transparency in the classroom, and I'll give you a brief example. When I work with my SAT kids, one of the things that and they were very excited about me, and I was actually surprised. I came through the door one day, and they were like, "She's here," and I looked behind me, and it was only me, and I'm like, okay, something good is happening here. One thing I realized that I did do, to God be the glory, is be transparent with them. I find that we look at transparency in companies and all that, and the social responsibility and all this, but we don't look at transparency in the classroom. And Xiaodong, you mentioned this, that we need to share our stories with our students and let them know that success, we see these stories in the news, and it can be very intimidating to see other people's successes without the process of failure. So thank you so much for your research. God bless.
One more quick one. We'll cut 1 minute off the break. Is that all right? Okay.
Okay, I just quickly wanted to ask, you were talking a lot about students being okay with failure. What about teachers' failure? One of my friends and used to be roommate was a teacher, and she said she was almost afraid of experimentation or trying something new in the classroom because it was this limited opportunity, and there are a lot of constraints on education.
Well, I knew this was going to be a big question.
Sorry.
Anybody have a quick answer for this? A quick comment, or should we take it to the break?
They're so stimulating. I'm so curious. I don't even know where to begin.
Well, that was a very quick answer. Perfect. The perfect answer. Okay, we have a 14-minute break, and we'll reconvene here at 4:15 for our last session of the afternoon. Thank you all very much. Thank you to the speakers and the respondents.